This is Edith Neumeyer, and I am the author of the book, The Mystery of Adam. Well, today I'm going to continue about kind of the historical development of marriage. I said 2 videos ago that Abraham and the time before Abraham was totally affected by a fallen culture. Now, people did not worship God, they worshiped idols, as we can see from Abraham. Abraham's father or family worshiped idols. And Abraham was kind of the one that got rid of those idols, even the idols of his father. And so they had to move away from the place that they lived in, which was most likely in the area of Ur, or the Sumerian culture. And so, matter of fact, during that time, the brother of Abraham died. And so Abraham and his other brother took his oldest brother's daughters as wives, which doesn't happen today, but it happened then. So Abraham's oldest brother had two daughters, which were twins, Sarah and her daughter and her sister. And then they had a brother, which was Lot. Now Lot stayed with Sarah and Abraham. So then when we don't see too much about the marriage between Sarah and Abraham and how they got married. But when we go to Isaac, it was interesting to see how their marriage ceremony kind of was conducted. So what happened after Sarah died, Abram decided that Isaac should have a wife. So he sends his servant back to his brother to get a wife for him from his household. And so he comes back with Rebecca. Now, let's talk a little bit about how Rebecca was chosen. Abram told him exactly how to go about to find this wife. So Abraham got instructions from God. And so his servant went about exactly how he commanded. And so what did he do? He went to, of course, his brother's household. He saw Rebecca, and he brought some gifts for the family. Then he was bringing forth his request that Isaac needed a wife, and they said yes. However, Rebecca was asked. It wasn't like in most families where the wife was just given away and she didn't have any rights. Rebecca actually did have the right to decline and say, no, I don't want this guy. So, but Rebecca agreed, and so Rebecca was given gifts and money as well. And so then, after she gives consent, she is being sent away to meet Isaac, which was a long journey. And so then when she saw Isaac, actually she saw him from afar and she asked, who is this? And she got off the horse or camel, whatever it was, and veiled herself. Okay? So she showed respect that she is a veiled woman now. So then Isaac took Rebecca and led her in the tent of her mother, and that was it. We don't hear anything about any marriage ceremony or anything. All we hear that the deal was made with the family, and Rebecca agreed, and that was it. So in other words, that was the marriage covenant. The marriage covenant in the Old Testament, they say, was mainly between the families. It was a contract between two families. And we see that many times. However, when we see that in the Bible, we say, so many times we say, oh, that's biblical. God wanted it that way. Well, no, that was a cultural arrangement. And in the culture during that time, that's the way things were done. It has nothing to do with God. Now, the thing is that Abraham was the one who was worshiping God. Now, we don't know if his brother was worshiping God too. We don't hear anything about that he now believed in the God of Abraham. But this contract between the two families were a family contract. It was not a contract like a spiritual or a religious contract at all. It was nothing done before God. We don't see that anywhere. Now, the next example that we get is of course, the marriage between Jacob, which again came from Rebecca and Isaac. Rebecca had two sons, Jacob and Esau. And we know how the marriage ceremony or contract between Jacob and his wives went. Jacob again was told by his father and his mother, go to my family. Or actually, Rebecca told Jacob, because he had to run from Esau, because Esau wanted to kill him. And so he had to run. So Rebecca said, go to my house, go to my family, and get yourself a wife there. And I don't remember even she said that, but she said, go to my family. So Jacob goes to the family of Rebecca. And so at that time, her brother was in charge. His name was Laban. And so Laban had two daughters and probably sons as well. And so Jacob falls in love with Rachel and wanted to marry her. And so what did he have to do? He had to work 7 years in order to afford getting married to her. So he had to pay a price for Rachel. He didn't have any money. Okay? And so he had to work for Laban, his uncle, for 7 years in order to get Rachel. But Laban tricked him. So did the sister of Rachel. They were twins as well. And Leah married Jacob. And so then, because he wanted to have Rachel, he worked another 7 years for Rachel. So Jacob therefore married 2 women. Well, that was definitely not biblical, or that was not from God. God never instructed that anybody can have more than one wife. That was God's intent. As we can see, the man shall leave father and mother and cleave to his wife, they become one flesh. Okay, how can you become one flesh and then add somebody else to that flesh? Impossible. You can't become one flesh twice. It's impossible. So at that time, Jacob already didn't understand what marriage was. And so, again, I'm assuming that Jacob married under the arrangements of the culture. Whatever the culture said, that's how they made the arrangement for marriage. Again, at that time, women were the property of the father or the husband. Now we see that Sarah had a pretty good relationship, with um, Abraham, and she, matter of fact, could even voice her opinions and her wishes. We can see that, when she says, "Well, send Hagar away," and Abram actually did it. Or she said, "Hey, here, take my maiden Hagar and have a child with her." So that was done in those days. So the people, even Abraham and his children, lived under the law of their time. It wasn't God's laws. There was no God's laws at that time. And most people didn't even live for God. We know that the only people that really lived for God was Abraham, and of course the family of Shem. Shem was one of the sons of Noah, and Abram came out of the lineage of Shem. And even Abraham and his sons were educated and educated about God in Shem's family. So they learned about God from Shem. So Abraham did that. However, when it came to marriage, the marriage was still done in the tradition of men. Okay, we also see the same thing. It's kind of really interesting. We then continue with Jacob and his 12 sons, and he had one daughter. What was her name? Something like Diana. Anyways, that was his only daughter. And his only daughter, she must have been pretty beautiful, because one of the kings that they lived around wanted her as a wife. And they came to, but he didn't just, get the price first, but I think he even slept with her. He took her, swooped her up. She must have gone into town, and this prince saw her, swooped her up, brought her home, and defiled her. And then after that, he came to Jacob and the brothers, his sons, and said, "Hey, I want her for my wife. What do you want? I'll give you anything." Well, the sons of Jacob were really upset that he just took, I believe her name was Diana, and they were really, really, really upset about that he kind of, in a sense, defiled her, because they believed that the Israelites at that point could not intermarry with any other culture, and here this king, they don't care, this prince defiled her. And we see in that example also that the father was asking Jacob for an arrangement for his son. So again, we can see that it's a family affair. But again, her brothers didn't like that, and so they killed almost the whole town, because they thought that Diana was violated, and so they took her back. And so there's nothing biblical. I mean, when people say biblical, Okay, they think it's godly as well. But there's so many things written in the Bible that are not ordained by God. They are just plain and simple cultural things that were described in the Bible. And we can't see that with marriage. So we don't see anything, um, again, until Abraham, that there was any arrangements that God has made um, with um, anybody about how marriage ought to look like. Now, we heard last time that after the fall, the original intent for marriage didn't exist anymore. Okay? With the fall came the break and the destruction of the marriage God has intended. And right after the fall, we see that the intention God had, where the husband or the man leaves father and mother and cleaves to wife, was over. Now we have seen now with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that who left who? The wife left her family and cleaved to the man, not the other way around. So it is interesting that no, what we see here in the Old Testament is absolutely not what God's intention was. Now, when we continue, we know that one of the sons of Jacob, Joseph, was sold into slavery. So he ended up in Egypt. And what did he do? Well, he got married to an Egyptian wife. So how do you think he got married? Well, under Egyptian law, of course. Okay? Because that's all he had to go by. That's all, you know, that the Egyptians went by. And so we don't see anymore what happens with Jacob's sons. Well, there's one interesting story, though, about Jacob's sons that is interesting to note. Okay? Here's what happened to his son Judah. Now, Judah was, and I don't remember, it was not the firstborn. Judah was, don't know which one, but definitely not the firstborn. It was not the firstborn of Leah. Leah had the most sons. And Rachel just had a hard time getting kids, so she only had two. And then she had kids with her servants, her maidens, one maiden, and so did Rachel. And Jacob accepted all children as his own. So he had 12 sons. So Judah was one of Leah's children. And Judah is also the one through which Messiah came. It's very important to notice. But this is what happened to Judah. Judah had 3 sons. And we don't know how he married, how he got a wife. Usually during that time, you find your wife and you bring her home, and that was it. Okay, same thing, made an arrangement with the father, and you bring her home, and that was it. Nothing done before, any ceremony before God or anything like that. We don't see that at all. So he brings her home, and he has 3 sons. Well, he gets a wife, and that's exactly the way it is. He gets a wife for the first son, and that wife was Tamar. And Tamar had no children, and her husband dies. Okay, had no children from him. So according to, I don't know, what law, but according to maybe there was no law of God at that time. But anyways, Judah says, wait for the next one until he's ready to marry, and then have a son from him. Well, guess what? That son did not want to have anything to do with Tamar. And so he died as well. And Tamar again is without a child. Remember, a child is very important because the child is the one that continues the lineage. So, and that's, I think that's why it's so significant. For women, they were supposed to continue the lineage of the husband. In other words, the lineage of Judah. So his oldest son is supposed to continue the lineage. So this son dies, then Tamar is waiting for the next one in line, and that one is not doing a good job either. Giving her an heir, because he doesn't want her to get pregnant, because again, then the heir would be from his brother, and it wouldn't be from him. So God, at least that's what the Bible says, took him and he died. And so Tamar again was without a child. So then Judah says, well, wait for the third son. Okay, he can make you a son. Okay, that again is the heir of the firstborn. Well, they played around more and more, and then Judah's wife dies. So Tamar was kind of upset and kind of got just tired with the whole thing. And so Tamar dresses up as a harlot. She hears that Judah is getting ready to go to some kind of celebration. And she probably knows that while he goes to the celebration, there's a possibility that he may have sex with a harlot. I don't know. How else would she find out about that? So she dresses as a harlot, goes to that place, and Judah falls for her without knowing that it's Tamar. Impregnates her. Tamar keeps his staff, so she has proof. Tamar gets pregnant, and Judah wants to have her killed because she was committing adultery, in a sense. She was fooling around, and Tamar says, here is the man who got me pregnant, and shows the staff. And Judah is realizing, wait a minute, she's a lot smarter than the rest of them, and he respects her decision, that she did this. So her two children, she again has twins, which runs into the family, and I don't know exactly where Tamar came from, whose daughter she was. So I have no idea what lineage she came from. Is she outside this whole clan? I don't know 100%. But anyways, for some reason, this lineage of getting twins is in her veins too. Could have been from Judah, I don't know, from that side. But there's a lot of twins in Abraham's lineage, which is really interesting. Sarah, I just said Sarah, twins. Who else is twins? Rebecca had twins. And then, of course, Jacob's wives, Leah and Rachel, are twins. So that is kind of in that bloodline. So here again, we come to Tamar. She gets two twins as well. And those two twins now are seen again in the lineage of the Messiah. So they're in the lineage of Judah, and then one of the twins And then the lineage continues. And I'm bringing this in a little bit because I thought it was such an interesting story with Tamar. I love that story. How Tamar outsmarted all of the guys during her time, especially Judah, um, and so she is in the lineage of the Messiah. Again, showing that women are extremely important in the lineage of Messiah. It's not through the man that comes Messiah, but through the women. Um, we see that from the beginning that God had in mind that a woman would bear Messiah, and also through the woman, Messiah would come, not necessarily through the men. And again, that is so important because, see, sin changed everything around. Okay? Everything became upside down. All of a sudden, men took over and they dominated things. They thought that they were the more important one. And of course, they were the stronger ones. They had to protect the family, they had to protect the women. However, they became so conceited that they thought, well, Messiah comes through their lineage. Abraham, oh, you know, it has to come through Abraham, the seed of Abraham. Yeah, it's the seed of Abraham, but through the woman. Sarah was just as important or even more important. It wasn't Hagar, okay? It was Sarah, through whom um, Messiah would come. Again, Jacob chose Rachel, and God says, no, the Messiah will come through Leah. And in a sense, I've never seen that. This is actually the first time I'm realizing this. That, yeah, Jacob loved Rachel, and he fell in love with her. But God had in mind that through Leah, the Messiah would come. Even though Leah was extremely deceitful, it was not, um, it's not a normal thing. I wouldn't think that it's a very nice thing to be deceitful, but Leah did it. And through Leah, Messiah came. Then through Tamar, Messiah came. Not necessarily through Judah. Judah again thought he's going to wheel and deal everything because he's the big one, right? But God says, no, it's the women as well. You are not the seed bearer. It is the women. So the woman came through who? Tamar. And for me, that is so wonderful, and how God works things out. So I will finish up today. This is a long one again. And we didn't even get past Abraham. That's because it's so important. And I just want you to really realize that the marriage after the fall is not what God's intention was anymore. And even though we may have description of how they, the ceremonies went and everything, that's not what God's intention was. God allowed it, like so many other things. God allows, um, you know, sin to continue because He knows He can't stop sin. Okay, the only way we can stop sin is through Jesus Christ, and that was His main goal. His main goal was to bring about Messiah, and then Messiah would change us, so we again can have the true marriage relationship. So, anyways, I will stop here and keep studying and thinking, really. My nephew told me I should give you guys at the end some question, so you can answer some questions. And every time I'm thinking, what questions am I going to give them? There's no question. I just want people to study the things that I was just talking about. Read about Leah. Read about and Rachel and Jacob and how these marriages came about. There was nothing, going, before God and sealing it. Now you have this forever and ever. That's not the way it went. So, anyways, I'll talk some more next time. Keep thinking and reading and studying and researching.